morning, my question: who could think calling a 9-year-old girl the C word is funny? Plus, the real Harlem Shake. Please do not be fooled by those viral videos. And VAWA passes as the House Republicans cave. But first, 3 years after the disaster in the Gulf, and BP is finally on trial. Good morning, I'm Melissa Harris Perry. Everyone have a good week? I don't know how you all fared these past 7 days, but down on Wall Street, it got pretty wild. One of the worst single-day plunges in months was followed by a near record high later in the week. On Thursday afternoon, the Dow just about hit its highest point ever, a record that was set in the fall of 2007 before the crash of this Great Recession. We also learned that this week, that American factories expanded for the third straight month, continuing what has been the biggest jump in manufacturing since the economy began to turn around. New analysis out this week further supported the positive signs that corporate America is on the mend. The S&P 500, that's the index that tracks the stock value of the country's 500 leading companies, is up more than 120% since March of 2009. Heck, the dollar gained strength this week, and all just in time for Wall Street bakers to get the most out of their bonuses, which on average increased nearly 10% this year. Did your pay? Yes, it is good to be a corporation these days doing business in America. Unless perhaps you are British Petroleum, because this week BP executives found themselves in court in my hometown in New Orleans on trial for gross negligence in causing one of the worst ecological disasters in written history, which took 11 lives and soiled hundreds of miles of beaches from Louisiana to Florida. For 87 days after the Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded 50 miles off the coast of Louisiana, oil was spilling into the Gulf. The disaster would eventually release as much as 206 million gallons of oil, a devastating blow to the Gulf's ecosystem. And to stem the tide of the spill, 2 million gallons of chemical dispersants were dumped into the Gulf, causing still more unknown damage to the fragile coastal ecosystems. In the 6 months that followed the spill, 8,000 birds, sea turtles, and marine mammals were found injured or dead. Shellfish beds that Gulf Coast residents depend on for their livelihood were decimated, costing millions in economic damage. But hey, BP paid out. Just this past November, the billion-dollar corporation pled guilty to felony manslaughter and environmental crimes, agreeing to pay out $4.5 billion on top of nearly $8 billion in settlement with those affected by the spill. And the company has already spent upwards of $14 billion on cleanup costs. And if you hear them tell it, things are now A-OK in the Gulf.
2 years ago, the people of BP made a commitment to the Gulf, and every day since, we've worked hard to keep it. BP has paid over $23 billion to help people and businesses who were affected and to cover cleanup costs. Today, the beaches and Gulf are open for everyone to enjoy.
All cleaned up, they say, pristine beaches for all to enjoy. In recent months, oil slicks have been detected in the region of the original spill. That is 33 months and counting since the Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded. Oil persists in the region. And as the Louisiana Attorney General said in his statement at Monday's hearing, the disaster has damaged Louisiana peoples. Most importantly, this disaster continues in various forms. Over 212 miles of Louisiana coast are being polluted and continue to be oiled. Many of those affected by the oil spill or the oil gusher will have their day in court in the coming weeks, hoping to prove that BP was grossly negligent in this disaster and should be made to pay upwards of $20 billion. And while, yes, BP has shrunk as a corporation and is now the smallest of the big four oil companies, it still brought in nearly $4 billion in profit last quarter alone. And BP continues to operate 700 offshore drilling licenses. It makes me wonder if even $20 billion wouldn't simply be a small price to pay for the profit brought by big oil. Joining me today, Sarah Gonzalez Rothy-Cronenthal, who is Senior Policy Specialist for the National Wildlife Federation. Brenton Mock, who's investigative reporter for colorlines.com, political strategist L. Joy Williams, who's also a host of This Week in Blackness, and Mike Conzel, who's fellow at the Roosevelt Institute, where he works on financial reform and writes the blog Rorty Bomb. So nice to have you all here. Brenton, I want to start with you. Okay, those of us living on the coast are watching this trial. Remind people what this trial is, who brought it, and what the kind of central claims are here.
Right, so this is the civil trial,
right,
where they're going to be determining who's responsible basically for the gusher, as you correctly identified it as. And right now there's a lot of finger pointing in that trial, which started this week. BP, Halliburton, and Transocean, these are all operators of the rig, and they're all pointing fingers saying, no, you did it, no, you did it. And it's really, just kind of, in the meanwhile, the oil is still out there in the Gulf.
Yep.
There's still about 1 million barrels of oil that's unaccounted for. Tar balls are still, washing up onto the coast. So at the end of this, like you said, they're going to try to figure out if $20 billion is the appropriate amount. But I know a lot of advocates on the Gulf are saying that no, they need to pay like upwards of $50 billion to really make it right.
And I think your point here, Sarah, I mean, on the one hand, I get the need for the commercials, that everything is fine, come back to the coast. It doesn't do us any good for those hotels to sit empty. It doesn't do us any good economically for people to think that there is a continuing disaster. But there is a continuing disaster.
That's correct, and that's a great point. I mean, do I hope the BP commercials are working and that people are going back to the Gulf? Absolutely. I want them to see it. I want them to fall in love with the Gulf. But the American people are not buying it. And in fact, a few weeks ago, we hand-delivered in other coalitions with other environmental organizations 133,000 petitions from all over the United States, not just Gulf residents, to the Department of Justice, asking them to hold BP fully accountable. And so the question is, what is accountability? There's two pieces of accountability that will be fleshed out in this trial. First of all, BP is liable under the Oil Pollution Act for every single blade of seagrass that was oiled, every single Gulf pelican that was harmed, and they're liable to us for our inability to use the Gulf during that time. 37% of the federal waters in the Gulf of Mexico were closed to fishing in the middle of the disaster.
And I want to pause here for just a second, because I want to sort of underline that point. On the one hand, we have these fundamental questions of human suffering, which we will get to, I promise. But I also don't want to miss that there is a responsibility to the Earth itself as the Earth, that they are responsible for the wildlife, for the water, for the ecosystem, that itself also has a standing in this case.
Certainly, and where that responsibility comes in is it's to all of us. It's to the American people. And that's why the Oil Pollution Act and the Clean Water Act have two sets of liability here. First, BP's got to pay for all the damage that they did to the environment. But in addition, because these profits are enormous, and we're talking about multinational corporations, you have to have a penalty in addition on top of the actual damage in order to deter future oil companies from taking these kinds of risky shortcuts, putting profits over safety.
And I want to go to just that question of profits, Mike, because we were just sort of looking at where corporate profits are right now. They are up 171%, despite all of the discourse about, oh, we have this terrible so-called socialist president who is redistributing income. 171% is the profit margin that these companies, and not just oil companies, but corporations in general. Is there anything that can get them to behave in a way that is responsive to anything other than the bottom line?
Well, lawsuits like this are very important. So it's one thing it's important to remember was the actual point of this gross negligence charge here that the civil courts are bringing forward. It's one thing for them to say, there's all these damages, we're going to pay them out. That's just basic fairness. We need something that is punitive, that punishes them, and that also sends a signal to other oil companies that are also building rigs and have to decide how much safety they're going to have and what their obligations are to the environment and to the people. And without a serious payout that is punitive and that actually deters future behavior, we're going to see more things like this.
I mean, but this is sort of torts 101, right? This is the class that all the law students who are not planning to do this kind of law are thinking, oh gosh, then I have to take torts, right? But the whole idea is that it does force a different set of business practices. We're just looking at the fact that some of the things that BP is being charged with is withholding crucial information from the government, consistent patterns of misreporting, a false impression of what was happening on the drilling project, right? This isn't just about, oops, we made a mistake. This is about a consistent pattern of discourse that was untrue.
So finally, somebody is being put on trial in terms of a large corporation for doing something wrong and to harm the American people and our ecosystem, right? And so in the age right now where we have corporations are too big to fail, we have to figure out how to help them so they don't destroy the rest of our economy. It's refreshing on one point to see that someone is actually going to trial and will have to answer a question in a courtroom: who is responsible? What did you do? What didn't you do in response to this?
That's what Elizabeth Warren kept asking. When was the last time you took somebody to trial?
Yeah, so in that trial helps to bring that information out, and it also helps to, as you said, hold them accountable so that people won't do it again. But the other part, the question I have definitely to those of you who are writing much more on it, is the difference in the penalties versus fines, right? In terms of if they pay fines or penalties, they'll get to write them off as on their taxes. So that is something else I think the American people don't know as well. So yeah, you can pay on it, but then I get to write it off.
Right. So going back to the two pieces that BP will face, they'll face compensatory damages and then they'll face penalties. And there is a differential tax treatment for fines versus penalties. But we believe, and the American people believe, BP needs to be held fully accountable on both counts.
Right.
And that's where you hear those figures of $45 billion. Is that gross negligence results in a fine of about $17.6 billion. In addition, if you look back at the Exxon Valdez oil spill and what ecological restoration cost per barrel in that spill, you come to a number of about $45 billion.
Yeah, I mean, we had this sense during the 2012 election, we kept hearing Mitt Romney say corporations are people, and I'm thinking, yeah, but if I killed 11 people and destroyed a whole neighborhood, I would not be having, $1 billion profits in my fourth quarter. The reality of them being not individuals, of them being not people, I think is very clear when we see the ways in which they are not held accountable. So after the break, how corporations get communities to act against their own self-interest. We're going to talk to Buddy Roemer next.